Most people think of a funeral home as a quiet building with velvet curtains, polished caskets, and organ music drifting through the air. But for African Americans, the funeral home has always been something more. It has been a fortress, a business, a bank, a stage for protest, a place where dignity was wrestled out of the grip of a society that often denied it. Black funeral homes didn't just bury the dead, they safeguarded the living. But to understand how we got here, how black undertakers became some of the most powerful and respected figures in their communities, we have to go back, to the plantation, to the shadows of slavery, to the places where black death was as controlled, policed, and exploited as black life. Welcome to Aggressive Intelligence, the channel where we dig into the hidden histories, the untold economics, and the survival strategies that shaped Black America. Picture this. It's midnight on a Mississippi plantation in the 1840s. A group of enslaved men and women move silently under the cover of darkness. They carry the body of a loved one, wrapped in a rough sheet. The overseer has given them an hour, no more. This is a funeral. On most plantations, enslaved people had no control over death. Burials happened at night or on Sundays, never during work hours. Overseers sometimes stood watch, afraid a funeral might turn into rebellion. Burial grounds were usually on unwanted land, swamps, wooded corners, sandy ridges no one else wanted. Graves were shallow, marked only with stones, sticks, or shells. Over time, those markers rotted away. The people inside risked being erased. And yet, enslaved people fought to preserve fragments of their culture. They whispered prayers, sang spirituals that doubled as coded messages, and placed bottles, shells, or pottery on graves, echoing African traditions meant to guide souls into the afterlife. But dignity was never guaranteed. In cities like Augusta, Georgia, medical schools robbed black graves for cadavers. Archaeologists later uncovered nearly 10,000 bones in the basement of one school, over 75% of them African American. Even in death, black people were stolen, cut apart, used. That fear of being denied dignity in death never left the black imagination. And it explains why, after emancipation, black communities fought to control the one thing slavery tried to strip from them, the right to bury their dead with honor. After the Civil War, a new profession emerged, the undertaker. White funeral homes often refused black bodies, or buried them cheaply and without care. The need was urgent. Black entrepreneurs stepped into the gap. Funeral service became one of the first respected and profitable black-owned businesses. Undertakers owned land, buildings, and vehicles. They employed drivers, florists, coffin makers. They were among the wealthiest and most influential members of their communities. By 1924, black funeral directors had formed their own national association, later called the National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association. They wrote their own rules, trained each other, and built systems of burial insurance. These weren't just morticians. They were business leaders, bankers, and protectors. In the Jim Crow era, the black funeral home was more than a business. It was a sanctuary. Churches were central, yes, but churches were heavily monitored. Funeral homes offered another type of safety. Their parlors hosted NAACP meetings, strategy sessions, even rehearsals for protests. Funeral directors often owned limousines and hearses, vehicles civil rights leaders could borrow when traveling through hostile towns. In life, black people were denied dignity. In death, the funeral home promised to restore it. Funeral homes were profitable, but they were also a lifeline. By the early 20th century, black funeral directors were among the most successful black entrepreneurs. They created jobs and circulated money in communities where white banks refused black clients. Companies like North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance grew into the largest black-owned financial institutions in the country, built largely on burial insurance. For a few cents a week, families could guarantee a decent funeral. That small dignity meant everything. The business of death became a foundation of black economic power. Then came the moment that would shock the world. In 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi. His body was so brutalized it was nearly unrecognizable. When his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, saw him, she made a decision that would change history. Let the world see what they did to my boy. At a Rayner and Sons funeral home in Chicago, his body was placed in an open casket. Tens of thousands filed past. Jet magazine published the photographs. The horror of his murder, preserved and displayed by a black funeral home, became a spark for the civil rights movement. A funeral director had turned grief into protest, mourning into revolution. If you're feeling the weight of this story and the power of what black business has built, hit that like button and subscribe to Aggressive Intelligence. We bring you the stories you won't find in the history books, deep dives into hidden economics, forgotten legends, and the business of survival. It happened again in 1968. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, his body was prepared by R.S. Lewis and Sons Funeral Home in Memphis. Despite the brutality of the wound, they restored his face so the world could say goodbye. In Atlanta, King's casket was carried on a mule-drawn wagon, a symbol of poverty and struggle, through streets lined with mourners. Once again, black funeral directors staged a funeral that became a national message. They turned sorrow into imagery too powerful to ignore. White mobs knew funeral homes were pillars of black independence, and they targeted them. In Tulsa, 1921, funeral homes burned alongside banks and churches when Black Wall Street was destroyed. In Rosewood, Florida, 1923, the town's businesses, including its funeral services, were wiped out by white violence. Even outside massacres, black undertakers faced harassment. White police disrupted processions. White funeral directors blocked access to supplies. Laws restricted black morticians from operating in certain neighborhoods. During the civil rights movement, funeral homes that hosted activists were bombed, firebombed, or threatened. The business of death was never safe from the violence of white supremacy. By the late 20th century, integration created new pressures. White funeral homes began serving black families, and corporations like Service Corporation International bought up independents nationwide. Costs rose sharply. By 2023, the median funeral with burial cost $8,300, while cremation averaged $6,280. Cremation now outpaces burial across America, cutting into profits for traditional funeral homes. Still, many black families hold fast to tradition, seeing funerals as a final act of love. And many black-owned funeral homes endure. Passed down through generations, they remain symbols of pride, resilience, and service. But horror still lurks. In 2009, at Burr Oak Cemetery outside Chicago, investigators discovered workers digging up bodies, dumping remains, and reselling grave plots. Among the desecrated items was the original glass casket of Emmett Till, left to rot in a shed. His body had been safe, reburied years earlier, but the disrespect was a chilling reminder. Even in the 21st century, black graves were not safe from exploitation. And during COVID-19, black funeral homes carried communities through overwhelming loss. Directors worked around the clock, arranging funerals by live stream, comforting families who couldn't gather, and protecting dignity when everything else collapsed. Black funeral homes tell us a story no textbook can. They carried us from midnight burials on plantations, to the open casket of Emmett Till, to the mule-drawn procession of Dr. King. They endured riots, bombings, segregation, and pandemics, and still stood tall. They proved that even in the business of death, Black America built dignity, survival, and power. Thanks for watching Aggressive Intelligence. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.